Hi, in this video, we're going to talk about earnings call transcripts of companies and why you should focus on them, especially if you're building a valuation model of a company. If you're building a career in valuation or investment banking, these are extremely relevant documents for you to build your understanding about a business or a company or a sector, right? Stay with me till the end and we'll talk about a particular company, their transcripts. We'll look at the practical examples and try and understand from their transcripts what information can be derived out of it, right? Before we go ahead, what is an earnings call transcript? Now, every quarter after a company comes out with its quarterly results, they hold a usual con call or conference call with a lot of analysts or investors who have invested in the company. In this, the analysts ask questions about, how the company's performance has been, what are its plans, have they faced any challenges, any capex that they're doing, what are the numbers like, and if they would want to share any other information. The management usually answers these questions, and in this transcript, you basically get a lot of information about the business and the sector, right? Where can we find it? We can find it on the company's websites in the investor relations segment. We can find it on the exchanges because once the company kind of has the con call, they submit it and, the transcript is available on the exchanges. You can also find it on websites like Screener, which kind of collate it and put it up quarter-wise for you to kind of have a look at this. What do you look for it? When you're reading one transcript, what should we look for when we are looking at a transcript? So let's kind of find out what all information could be available. Now, remember, it is not necessary that in every call, every earnings call, the company management talks about everything that we're looking for. But if you read it across multiple quarters for a particular company, you will start getting a lot of information about what's happening in the business, what's happening in the sector, and what is the management really trying to do. राइट कंपनी के बारे में, कंपनी के सेक्टर के बारे में, कॉम्पिटिटर्स के बारे में, उनके प्लान्स के बारे में, कस्टमर फोकस, कस्टमर बिहेवियर के बारे में बहुत सारी इंफॉर्मेशन हमें इन कॉन कॉल ट्रांसक्रिप्ट्स के अंदर मिल जाती है. So that's what we are going to try and focus on and we'll look at and understand it. What all information is available? Generally, you will find information pertaining to the industry, to the company. So sometimes, what's the industry structure? What are competitors doing? All of that information is available. What is the company up to? What are they, producing? Sometimes the companies actually give you the entire business model as well, right? Initially, when smaller companies are coming up with their first earnings transcript, then they also detail out what their business is like. For established businesses, usually that is not the case, but established businesses any which ways give a lot of other information about their business, which you then can kind of decode in terms of your understanding. You can talk about capex plans. You can look at business outlook. You can understand what the company is trying to do. Is pricing going up, going down? Is raw material price a pressure or not? How's the competition behaving? All of this information can be found in one or the other earnings transcript because a lot of the times what happens is analysts ask these questions, right? There are a lot of analysts who would be tracking these companies, and after every quarterly result, some or the other analyst would have certain questions about the company's performance. And under those assumptions, under those discussions is what you will find a lot of details about it. Now, why is it important for us? Tomorrow, let's say if I am building a valuation model for a company, then how do I go about putting my assumptions for what is going to be capex next year? Do I see an assumption about pricing changes in the business? Do I see an assumption about raw material pricing changes? Do I see an assumption about, how the competition is going to behave? Is margin going to be under pressure or not under pressure? Is the company focusing on increasing margins or not increasing margins? All of that information is kind of available to me, right? That's what I can try and derive from earnings con call. I wouldn't say all the information is available in each con call transcript, but basically if you skim across multiple con call transcripts, you will find a reasonable amount of information to at least some of your core questions when you're building a valuation model, right? So let's take an example. Let's dive right into it. We'll pick the example of Eicher Motors, right? The Royal Enfield manufacturer. And they also have a commercial vehicle business, which they run as a JV with Volvo. And that's a Volvo Eicher commercial vehicles entity, the numbers of which kind of get sort of added as a JV in their financial numbers. So their financials are predominantly the two-wheeler numbers that we see, right? Where do we find it? You can go on the website Screener and search for the company. Once you search for the company, there is a tab called Documents, under which you will find all the conference call transcripts which are available quarter-wise. So I'm going to pick up a couple of them. I'm going to look at the latest quarter number, quarter 3 for this financial year, and the same quarter 3 for previous financial year. So I'm going to look at two transcripts. दो transcripts हम देखेंगे. और देखेंगे इसमें क्या information हमें दी गई है, what is the information available, and what's the company trying to tell us about the business, right? Very quickly, I'm just going to run through this in your own time. Please take it out, and try and read through these transcripts in more detail. That'll be a very helpful exercise, right? So first up, last year, Q3 transcript is what we're going to pick up, Q3 FY24. Let's understand some details about it. So what you see here is the company has given you the volume data, how many motorcycles, for example, they have sold in this quarter versus last year's same quarter. They have also kind of told about the growth of that particular segment, that the premium segment, Royal Enfield, remember, is a premium motorcycle. The premium segment is growing at a healthy pace and now contributes 24% of the overall motorcycles. So premium is defined as greater than 150cc, I think. And then basically that is what is the overall data. They also say Q3 has been the highest ever domestic retail for Royal Enfield so far. International sales, they've said, is 11% lower. Somewhere later on in this transcript, they've also told about why it has been lower, right? What's the kind of market share they have across various regions? So they're top 3 in Europe, 8-9% market share there. In US or American regions, they have about 8% market share and 9% in Asia Pacific as well, right? So that details about market share across global geographies is also available. They talk about specifically a buyback plan. Remember, and I'll link this to something else as we go along. When you're trying to build a model on a two-wheeler company, you have to understand where is demand coming from, right? So the company talks about a buyback program, saying that they're buying back older Royal Enfield vehicles as a bit to kind of sell the newer models to their customers. And then they talk about who could these customers would be, or who would come and sell these older bikes to them. Moving on to the commercial vehicle segment, they talk about Volvo Eicher commercial vehicles, highest ever Q3 sales. They talk about the first electric 5.5 ton truck that they have kind of launched, and they continue delivering electric buses to customers across the country. So what kind of developments are happening on that front is coming up. EBITDA margin in the quarter for Volvo Eicher commercial vehicles is 8% as against 6.6% in the previous year. Now they're talking about the revenue comparison. And they say that, with roughly 5,500 crore revenue, there's a healthy competition between Royal Enfield and Volvo Eicher commercial vehicles. So revenue-wise, they're kind of similar, but profitability-wise, Volvo Eicher commercial vehicles needs to catch up. Basically, with respect to motorcycles, you'll find that it is a predominant segment that contributes profitability to the company. But revenue-wise, commercial vehicles, obviously, because the per unit selling price of the commercial vehicle is high, that kind of matches up with the vehicle data. Then there are questions that are available, and they talk about, somebody asked a question that why don't you bid for any government projects in the buses segment? So they say that, irrespective of a push from anywhere, the profitability has to be there. We can't bid for a project where the payment cycle is like a long period. They say about 12 years, state transport utilities kind of making a payment over 12 years. And unless there's a sort of understanding that there's some kind of a reasonable profitability, they do not want to participate in those segments. So that is what they talk about and emphasize on, right? They also talk about a couple of data points where they say that, a bunch of how many sort of active 350cc customers are there in India. So 6 million, etc. And they've said that they've sold about 6.5 million motorcycles between 2011 and 23. Remember, we spoke about the buyback program. So they are saying that there is going to be a replacement demand that is going to come from people who bought these vehicles between 2011 and 2023. And that is why they have come up with that buyback program, saying that make it easy for the customer to sell the previous bike and buy a new Royal Enfield vehicle, right? Then they kind of talk about raw material prices. Somebody asked a question that, what's happening on margins. So they said that, steel has been sort of stable, aluminum has been stable. That also, if you're somebody who's analyzing this business, tells you what is the core raw material. So tomorrow, if you're building a model and you read somewhere that steel prices or aluminum prices are going up, then you can come back to a transcript call and understand that, okay, does it impact? Does it not impact? Will the company be able to pass on the price rise or input price rise or not? Right? Then they talk about the commercial vehicles and they say that, the replacement demand of older trucks is going to be very, very large. And the entire population of BS3, BS4 old trucks is going to come up for replacement at some point of time. And because of this, they are much more productive, more efficient. So that's a likely transition that is going to happen in the coming years, right? Next up, we move on to the Q3 of the current financial year con call and try and understand what's happened in this. And then they again give you numbers, for example, what's been the EBITDA margin this year versus last year for the company. And you'll note there's a reduction in EBITDA margin that has happened here at this point, right? So that's basically something that has played out. During the quarter, they've sold a certain number of bikes. They again talk about the volume data that is available. If you're projecting details of the company on a financial model, then these volume data points are very important. They will say that premium, which is more than 125cc, is also showing a healthy growth essentially. In the international segment, they shipped 27,000 units in Q3, increase of 71% over last year. We can go back and look at what was the number of international shipping last year. So last year, they talked about international shipping as 15,000 odd units. And now we have talked about 27,000 odd units if we are not wrong, right? So year on year, if you're tracking these con call transcripts, you will get an information about what kind of growth has kind of played out over this period as well, right? Then they talk about commercial vehicle industry and they say there has been a decline in the industry and that is slowing down what kind of sales there was there, attributed to lingering softness post the union elections and uneven monsoon in many parts of the country. So they also try to give you the reason of why commercial vehicles is a little bit slower essentially. Demand for buses remains very strong. So heavy duty and light and medium duty sort of buses, what kind of growth is basically playing out, that is being kind of looked at. They talk about Volvo Eicher commercial vehicles, highest ever quarterly sales, year to date sales, and so on and so forth. That is kind of coming up there. Talking about pricing, they've said that they've not increased pricing. So there may be a margin pressure. Remember, we read somewhere that EBITDA margins have gone down. They're focusing on growth, ensuring they do not increase pricing too much so that customers do not see the pinch of higher prices at any point of time. Inventory levels, they talk about 2 to 3 weeks of inventory on the two-wheeler segment. And that's their usual inventory. So we get information on inventory as well. Talking about commercial vehicle outlook, they will say that, first 9 months, there has been a stagnant and marginal drop. And then what do they see as parameters on when it will open up or what will happen there? CapEx. Somebody asked a question about what is the CapEx guidance. So they tell you that they're on track for about 1,000 crore of CapEx during the year. So you see, when you kind of look at a bunch of this information, you're getting information about volume data, how many units they are selling. You're getting information about financials and more specifically margins, getting information about market share of the company, right? And not just, in both the segments, all the segments of the company, like it is bikes or commercial vehicles, you're getting this information, getting information about pricing or if the company is increasing pricing or not, what kind of plans the company has, what kind of capex the company is doing, where does it see the demand coming from, what's the customer behavior, right? Exports, they're talking about exports and all. So a bunch of this information about your business model is available. If you are to build a valuation model of the company and you want to project volumes, you want to project margins, you want to talk about raw material costs, right? You want to talk about what's happening to the market share of the company. You want to talk about what segments are growing in the country, right? So growth rates, you can try and kind of read between the lines and understand and go back and kind of plug those numbers in your model. What kind of debt the company has. Sometimes questions about debt are also asked. In this case, there isn't too much debt, but there could be companies where analysts are asking about what is the plan to repay debt, or do you have any plans to raise more debt, or so on and so forth. People ask about working capital cycle. In this case, we talked about inventory and inventory was available. Sometimes in this business, receivable is not a very big chunk. But in some other businesses, analysts might ask question about what has happened to receivable days, for example, right? So a bunch of this information is available on the con call transcripts. I would urge you to try and look at some of these transcripts, pick up any company you're working on, go and look at some of these transcripts from Screener and read through them. I'm sure you'll find a lot of information around it. That's it in this particular video. If you have any feedback around it, please drop that in the comment section. If you found it useful, please drop a like as well. Thank you.